All right, so my name again is Tom McLaughlin. I have a company here. I have a company not here, actually up in Boston, called Serverless Ops. It's an AWS cloud and DevOps consulting company with specialties in working with serverless and working with startups. And so I'm here to present Serverless DevOps. What do we do when the server goes away? This isn't a purely serverless talk. It's actually a DevOps talk too. This talk is about how technology affects people and process. In particular, how serverless the technology affects someone like me, an ops person. I will come out and say I don't believe that serverless is going to make DevOps go away, but it's going to make you think differently about DevOps. And I think it's going to hopefully clarify some aspects of DevOps that we've been commonly getting a little wrong. So I started working with Lambda about close to 2 years ago, and my first experience just gave me this like terribly uneasy feeling. My task was to basically take some JSON from one API and shove it into another API. And I really didn't feel like spending a lot of time scaling up an auto-scaling group, doing some configuration management. So I went the serverless route for the first time. And what I had done was just eliminated a few hours worth of toil, and I focused on my core problem, which was boiled down to taking some JSON from one API and shoving it into another API. But that time, I was actually not in operations, and I wasn't even actually in engineering at the time that I did this project. So what I had also done was bypass my old team, and that reminded me of a particularly rough incident in my career. So I was on the technical operations team of a SaaS product company. I had left one company before which said, no, we're never doing this DevOps thing. This is just never going to happen here. So I felt, I was ahead of the pack. I felt comfortable. I felt safe in my career. And it came to a point one day where my VP of engineering literally said to me, if you can't code, then you're just another IT person here. And it's easily the smallest feeling moment in my professional career. And there's no happy ending to this story. I actually left a few months later. I left on my own volition because I really didn't want to wait around for the day that somebody told me, hey, you're no longer good enough for your job. So how many of you can relate to that story? All right? How many of you folks went through something like this, or you had friends or colleagues who struggled with DevOps adoption? How many people watch like successive bimodal IT reorgs, and you had those people that kept being left in sad mode? So, as a result of this particular incident, I am regularly worried about being replaced or no longer qualified. And so when I started looking at serverless, I became very concerned about a repeat of my career past. But when I go talk to, potential clients, this is like really the reality of what I find. My target clients have little to no operational expertise in-house. Ops is just somebody's part-time job because they're the person that knows how to create things in AWS. A few weeks ago, I saw Cassandra data loss because of a multi-node ring that had been running in production for over a year with no replication enabled. So you're thinking, you're like, well, yeah, but I don't have to operate a serverless database. I don't have to operate DynamoDB. Okay, I'll give you this question. How many of you have a deletion policy on your DynamoDB tables in CloudFormation? What happens if you make a configuration change that requires a replacement? I asked this question among a bunch of serverless people, and I actually got different answers. We traced it to the fact that whether or not CloudFormation will save you from blowing your foot off is actually a result of whether or not you explicitly name your DynamoDB tables or whether you use CloudFormation auto-generated names. Last time I gave this talk, there was a group of about 3 people in one of the front rows that feverishly looked at each other, and then somebody pulled out a laptop and started typing. Found out later, they actually didn't know the answer to that, and they filed a bunch of tickets to go through their environment to double check. They just didn't know. I had another incident where we found IM keys in code, and that's like the least problematic part of this story. What we found is these IM keys were being used to write application data to what we thought was a non-production account so it could be served to users. We had no clue. And there's just like a lot to unpack of like what went wrong there, okay? And serverless is not going to prevent people from using things incorrectly. So my experiences give me this reason to believe that my expertise is going to remain as organizations go serverless. But we need to redefine our role in our organization, potentially acquire some new skills in order to remain relevant. So let's start with a great question. What is serverless? And you're at a DevOps Days conference. There's probably like more definitions of DevOps in this room than there are actual people. Same goes with serverless. Everyone gives you a slightly similar but conflicting, definition. I'm going to use these. These 4 characteristics, they come out of AWS. I like them. And these are 4 characteristics of something of an application or a service that is serverless. There's no servers, VMs, or containers to manage or provision. If your application is idle, you're not paying for it. Your services scale up with usage. You're used to auto-scaling groups and having to figure out how to scale EC2 instances. No more of that with AWS Lambda. AWS is taking care of that for you. And then availability and fault tolerance is built in. If you're used to running message queues, you run maybe a queue per availability zone. Here, you allocate an SQS queue, and you're done. And this is a basic serverless app. We got a user interacting with a delightful web front-end web application. Okay, and it's an S3 bucket, boop, and CloudFront. And that S3 bucket, it's got some HTML, some images, some client-side JavaScript, and there's no Nginx host in there anywhere for me to manage or configure. And if you're paying attention, you also notice there's no Lambda function either. Okay, some of you may have actually been building and running serverless applications but didn't have the language to realize that. So the next thing we got is this yellow blocky thing, and that's an API gateway. And so what I do with that is I configure it with an HTTP verb, and I say, if you post some JSON to this endpoint, that Lambda function is going to take that JSON, do something with it, and just shove it into DynamoDB. And that state change on DynamoDB results in an event being placed on a stream. And there's a worker that's going to pick that event up, and it's going to take that event, and it's going to shove it into the giant question mark that represents your understanding of what your employer does, how it creates value, how it generates the money to pay your salary. So in these systems I showed you, where does someone like me, where does someone like you belong? So let's explore this, and let's get this, this part out of the way. Get rid of your ops team. I'm hoping I woke a few folks up and everything. And it's intentionally in here to wake a few folks up. I don't think this is the one true path for you to go, but it is a way to go. And I'm a little bit opinionated about this, but I think as we go on, you'll see why. So in the fictional beginning of software development and engineering, we had these 2 functionally aligned teams, dev and ops. And DevOps transformation started happening. And for a lot of us, we said, we're going to tear down the walls between our silos. And then DevOps happens. Like somebody right now has got like a conference bingo card where they're just like, yep, crossing off, check off, tear down the walls between their silos. Awesome. How many times have you heard that in the last 8 years at these conferences? But this is more what your reality looks like for a product company. It's these multiple functionally aligned teams that all exist in the service delivery process. And all these teams, there we go, are needed to get something out the door. But they have their own individual direction because they have their own wants, their own needs, their own success criteria. So product engineering organizations started realizing this wasn't so efficient. So they formed product pods, feature teams. I like to just call them value delivery teams. They're cross-functional teams along the line a business problem or capability traveling in a single direction. And they're not just dev teams. They have a PM, they have a designer. A lot of your dev teams today aren't just developers. They've been enhanced through the addition of these other skills. But a lot of times in these reorganizations, we got left over here, Somebody's got to like operate the levers of the infrastructure. Somebody has to operate, the EC2 control plane, Kubernetes, and all that stuff. So while we've been talking amongst ourselves about the DevOps principle of flow and things like that, teams around us have actually already been reorganizing to achieve this. Look, if you're in an organization that goes with a serverless first mentality, meaning you're going to build serverless solutions unless you somehow can't, then that feature team doesn't really need you, the ops team. They don't need to go through you to reach the user. And you're no longer a part of this actual value delivery process. Your only option is kind of to play toll booth operator in your organization, okay? Where your role exists out of policy instead of any sort of actual need of the organization. And even then, what are you going to do? Tell developers, oh no, you can't touch this CloudFormation or Terraform? No. Like, serverless development just doesn't work that way. They need this. So, we can remain secluded and bypassed, as I feared earlier, or this is how I see ops teams going away. It's leaving our functionally aligned teams and heading to these value delivery teams. So it's the ops team that goes away and not the ops people. We're still important. We also now become a direct part of the value delivery process. And this, to me, is part of that DevOps promised land. It's this small group of people with different expertise working together to efficiently deliver value to a user. So you've left your ops team, you've joined one of these value delivery teams. And what are you going to do now? What are you going to do as a member of this team? Well, with a lot of us in the serverless community, we use this term called different ops. Here's the thing. A lot of what I'm going to describe looks vaguely similar to what you're doing now. It just looks a little different. Serverless doesn't make operations go away. It just changes it. So here's some of the things you'll find yourself doing. Sooner or later, you're going to be in a design meeting where your team is going to have an excruciating argument about how to perform synchronous requests and whether or not you should directly invoke one Lambda to another or if you should stick API gateway in between. No matter what you choose, you will somehow annoy half of the internet and they will think you are wrong. And then Paul Johnson will yell at you or something like that. Is he here? He's not. But look, you're an ops person. You're capable of rapidly building and researching each solution, building a POC, and helping to solve your concerns about performance, cost, scalability, usability with actual data. Not just opinions, actual data. So you just instrument some of your functions, you send data to say like Thundra, Epsagon, IO pipe, and you use a tool like Artillery to drive invocations, and then you can make recommendations on what to use. You can take that a step further. You can write up an analysis of how you came to this decision, and you can help actually create guidelines that people can follow the next time they have to have this conversation. Because guess what? Both of those are right in different circumstances. And that was a simple example. This is the AWS table of AWS periodic table of services, something like that. And this is what you're cobbling together, building a lot of your serverless applications. And do any of you actually know what most of these are? Because I don't. No. Like, do you know how they all work? How they all perform, their limitations or their gotchas? No. But understanding and explaining how other people's technology works has been one of the most common ops tasks for me my entire career. So now let's move on. Let's talk about making our applications a little more reliable. All right, you should be involved in design and PR reviews. Someone is going to try and ship this. It's very simple. It's a Lambda function subscribed to an SNS topic that writes to DynamoDB. Look, the person in your organization who thinks the cloud is reliable today is going to think the cloud is reliable tomorrow when you go serverless. Okay? Now, yeah, SNS is going to, do performance retries and so forth, but that may not be enough for your application to function properly. So in your head, you start drawing this. Okay, I want to make sure that there's a dead letter queue, so when that fails enough times, the event gets dropped there. And then over to the side, I've got maybe a dead letter queue reprocessor. I got something that's going to try again later for me. I've also got some alarms. I've got a low watermark alarm. That's just going to let me know, hey, you got something rattling in the queue, maybe you should take a look at this. You got a high watermark alarm, which is, hey, something's really broken and you should probably get out of bed. And then, if you start seeing certain patterns creeping into your environment regularly, okay, you should build some sort of reusable version of that logic, whether it's some combination of configuration and code. And this is SAR, Serverless Application Repository. Build a reusable version and publish it, so the next person doesn't have to sit there and recreate the wheel in your environment. But we're not going to stop with just architecture and diagrams. You're going to have to go beyond that, and you're going to have to start going into the code itself. I got into this profession because I didn't want to code. I had a really bad experience in CS 101, and I said, hey, this system administration career, this is probably more for me. But there's no way you can be successful in a serverless environment if you don't have some coding ability. How are you going to solve your database failures if you can't even understand what's going on? Simple function here, all right? Tiny, simple, write some data to DynamoDB, and I just assume the cloud is reliable, of course. But I want to throw some retry logic in there. I got my retry decorator that's going to give my code a few extra attempts to make sure that this completes. Okay? And you don't need to be a coder that's going to sit there balancing B trees or anything like that. I have no clue how to do that. He's speeding me up. You need to ensure that the failure of a computer you've never heard of doesn't impact your application. So, more complicated problem. Here's a chain of events starting with my user. And why is it failing? It's because somebody decided, let's throw some emojis at our API. If you throw emojis at an API, you will find some really weird behavior. And the thing about this is, the bug isn't there. No, the bug's in that first function because we forgot to sanitize any inputs. So you have to start looking at your application and say, I need to be able to traverse function boundaries, service boundaries, even team boundaries in order to solve these things. Really quick, bold prediction. Here's the two things that a lot of you folks aren't doing. Who does regular game days where you do these like practice fire drills of like events, of incidents in your environment? How about chaos engineering? Like, these are two sorts of topics that I swear they're mostly done in conference talks and blog posts. Because most of us are sitting there saying, we're too busy operating this stuff. We don't have time to do these proactive things. We don't have time. We're not like those really mature organizations, so we can't do this. And moving on here, the past few years, we've been talking about, okay, the shift left, right? Everyone's shifting left to development. But that's not really where this shift left ends, okay? This shift left ends by shifting onto product. If you're saving time and toil on infrastructure by going serverless, I'm going to challenge you to not spend more of your time rubbing more technology on your problems. I'm going to challenge you to spend more time understanding what you're building, why you're building it, how it contributes value to your business, and how to tell if you're producing any actual value to your organization. I chatted with a company a few weeks ago. They estimated their market size is 100,000 people globally. That's it. And I really started thinking about it. I'm like, you're right. That's very different than what I'm used to, okay? They have low transaction volume, but high transaction value. Most places I've worked at, no, high transaction volume, low value. I'm going to adjust what I'm going to spend my time on, and where what I need to do, based on the fact that I understand what this business does and how it goes forward. This is what happens when you update Keynote. It screws up all your graphs. Does anybody here sit and talk? I work a lot with a lot of product companies. Does anybody here confer with product teams about growth metrics? Okay. Do you know what scale you actually have to support? Or does anytime you have a question about scale, you just automatically, reflexively say, oh, more is better? Here's another one, user sentiment versus performance. If you're spending a bunch of time on, trying to, get the most performance out of your application, but you're not budging user sentiment, maybe the problem isn't performance. Maybe the problem is that your application doesn't do what's anything useful to the user. So, you can't look at your work as, oh, I have an API gateway, and it'll trigger a Lambda function that shoves some JSON to DynamoDB. You need to start thinking, I have a customer, and I want them to be happy. And they're going to interact with an interface, and that interface will trigger some business logic that is unique and valuable to our organization, okay? And as we shift closer to the product side of engineering, we should all be involved in asking ourselves, what are the features we're building and why? Okay, service and its promise of faster, value delivery is also a very efficient means of creating and delivering garbage to your users if you're not actually paying attention to what's important. So you need to understand, how does your organization work and how does it sustain itself? That is the bigger mindset shift of serverless than event-driven compute and all this sort of stuff. We've removed the infrastructure details so that you can spend your time on things other than engineering. And so with our new time, look at adoption rates of what you've shipped. Look at customer sentiment. Look at the actual amount of support tickets that are being generated in your organization. Yeah, that's my user right there, okay? And I build things for them because it's my user that gives my work actual meaning. And the more we abstract away the technical bits, the more I can actually focus on that person. This is why I keep saying serverless won't make DevOps go away. That was the point all along the way. It wasn't just infrastructure as code and CI/CD. Okay, look, DevOps is about how do we produce value and the users that we made happy along the way. Thank you. And I got to wrap it up. If you want to read the ebook, take a picture. Thank you.